Hi, I'm going to show you how to embroider these silk ribbon roses onto this embroidered trinket box top that I'm making here. So here's the little box when it's all finished. I'll show you everything you need to know. So I've got some muslin in a embroidery hoop, and I've got a piece of silk that I'm going to use for a backing. I've just marked the edges of the box top with some pins there. I've just marked the corners so that I can see how big it needs to be for me to cover the top of the box, and I can embroider then within this area. So I'm just going to run some tacking stitches. I could use an air erasable pen, but this fabric is so dark and you can't really see it, so that you can see and so that I can see, I'm just running some tacking stitches around the edge of the square that I need to embroider. I can remove these later. So I've got a little brooch here that I found in a charity shop for a couple of quid. I think I'm just going to pin that there, and this is a cabochon that I bought from Etsy, and I've just stuck a picture behind the glass bit there, so I'm going to use that in this design as well. So I'm going to clip off the little ring at the top there because I don't need it. I want this to look all the same all the way around, so I'm getting rid of any extraneous bits and pieces there. I can just pin that back. When you're buying cabochons for this, you need to make sure that you buy ones with filigree work around the edge, because otherwise you won't be able to sew them down. I'm going to just remove the brooch backing from this brooch here because I don't want that. I want it nice and flat against the fabric, so I'm just using some side cutters just to get rid of the brooch fittings. And I've just got the beautiful flower there, which I'm going to stitch on. So I've got some invisible thread. This is a monofilament. It's very tough and you can't see it once you've used it to sew things down. So I'm just going to stab stitch over the stalk and stems of this little flower to hold it firmly against my fabric. I'm going to do exactly the same thing with the cabochon as well, to use the invisible thread just through the filigree work around the edge to fasten it down securely onto my fabric. So this is a tablecloth I bought in a charity shop. Everything comes from a charity shop. I've just cut little bits out of the tablecloth. I use this tablecloth all of the time. Just rob it for little bits and pieces of lace, and I'm just using some standard machine thread just to stab stitch this into place. To get the Victorian look, you need to amass little bits and pieces, really, little bits of jewellery, little bits of lace, any little bits and bobs you've got will add to the Victorian look. So I'm now going to just colour this lace a nice tea green. This is a Pro marker pen, permanent marker pen. It won't bleed out into your backing fabric, provided you don't touch your backing fabric with it. And you just need to touch it onto the lace, and the lace fabric will draw the pigment that it needs. So now I'm going to start to do some silk ribbon embroidered spider roses. I'm using a 2mm pure silk embroidery ribbon. I've drawn 3 circles in the corner here, and I'm just doing little 5-spoke spider web thing, and this is the start of the spider rose that I'm going to do. So you see I've got 5 spokes. They're roughly equal in distance around the centre. So I'm just going to do a group of 3 of these. So for any of this silk ribbon embroidery, you must make sure you use pure silk ribbon. Any other sort of ribbon will not fold small enough for you to be able to do this and pass it through the fabric like you need to. So silk ribbon folds very small. It won't damage itself, and it won't damage the fabric that you're trying to sew onto either. So now I'm just going to prepare some 7mm pure silk embroidery ribbon by running it through a set of hair straighteners. You can use a regular iron. A set of hair straighteners is a lot easier and quicker because you don't need to flaff around with an ironing board or anything. So I've got here a chenille needle. Chenille needles have sharp points and large heads. I'm going to start this off by doing a French knot. So wind the ribbon 3 times around the needle pass the needle back down through the fabric and pull tight, and that will form a French knot there. I'm going to use the sharp needle here to bring the ribbon back up to the front of the fabric. I'm now going to change for a blunt needle. This is a tapestry needle. It's got a very blunt rounded end, and I'm going to weave now in and out, or rather over and under these little spokes that I made. So because 5 is an odd number, you will always have alternating over and under on each spoke, which is what you're trying to achieve to get this rose effect. These little silk ribbon roses, really quintessentially Victorian things, and if you put these with a few other bits and pieces, you will always get something that looks very ornate and Victorian in nature. So I'm just winding this silk ribbon over and under, alternating as I go around this rose. So keep winding the ribbon until you can't see the ends of the spokes anymore. So you probably want to keep going a little bit further than you think you can. Just keep tucking it under and keep going. You can order these ribbons from craftyattic.com. We've got many different size bundles. There are only 4 different sizes of silk ribbons, so we do starter kits, and we do all the different sizes in many different lengths for you. So I'm just coming up to finishing this this little rose here. I'm going to keep going round until I can't see the ends of the spokes anymore. So now I've done 3. I'm just going to use the end of this 7mm to form some leaves. I'm going to do a puffed ribbon stitch. So you leave the ribbon puffed up away from the fabric slightly, and you pass the ribbon back down through the centre of itself, just allowing it to pull into a point at the end to form a leaf shape. So I'm going to do a few of these sticking out from the edges of the roses to form a nice little group of flowers. My second one. I'm just going to keep going and do a few more. So now I've got 2 pro markers here. I've got Sun-Kissed Pink and Dusky Rose. So I'm just using the fat end of the Sun-Kissed Pink pen, and I'm just letting the ribbon soak itself with the ink, and I'm just then using the darker Dusky Rose pen on the very tips and edges of the flower, and that way you get a beautifully natural variegated sort of result. I've got 2 other pro markers here, Grass and Holly. I'm using the grass green at the base of the leaf and the holly green towards the end of the leaf, and that gives you a beautiful natural leaf colouring. Just allow the colours to blend together along the warp and weft of the silk. The silk will do all the work for you. So there we go, we've got a beautifully natural result. Just finish off by colouring the last leaf there. So now I've got some 4mm pure white silk embroidery ribbon, and I'm going to do some little, I suppose you'd call them forget-me-not flowers. I'm just going to do 4 little puffed ribbon stitches coming out from a central point, so 4 petals basically, just coming out at a 90-degree angle from each other. So once again, leaving a slight puff in the ribbon, passing the ribbon back down through the centre of itself and allowing the tip just to fold into a little point. You don't want to be pulling too hard because you'll pull the stitch right the way through, you'll pull it flat and it'll lose all its life. If at any stage your ribbon starts to get a little bit creased, because you've been passing it through the fabric a few times, you can just run your hair straighteners over it again, a set of mini straighteners. And this is why straighteners are so great. You don't have to lay it flat on a board, you can just rip your straighteners just up and down the ribbon, and that'll do the job for you, and it'll be beautifully glossy and flat again. So you can see I've done one little bloom there. I'm just going to work my way up and around the brooch top that I made there. So I've got these beautiful little flowers now. I've done some French knots on the end to just form some buds to finish that little spray of flowers off. These two pens are Duck Egg Blue and Cobalt Blue. So I'm using the lighter colour, the Duck Egg Blue, in the centre of the flower, and I'm just touching the Cobalt Blue pen to the ends and allowing the silk to blend the colours for me. I love combining these silk ribbons with other things. They're just so versatile. You can do anything with them, and they're so quick as well. It's such a quick thing to do. And because we're doing everything in white ribbon, you don't need to keep anything else. So I've just got some little orange seed beads here, a small needle and just a regular thread, and I'm just going to sew one seed bead into the centre of each one of these little forget-me-not flowers. Okay, so I've done some more spider roses. These I've done in exactly the same way as I did the previous ones, in the left hand bottom corner, except that I'm using a 4mm ribbon to flesh these out rather than a 7mm ribbon. So I'm using the same 2mm to make the spider web to begin with, so the 5-spoke wheel. So I'm doing those in exactly the same way, only obviously I've drawn smaller circles. If you want to make real big ones, you just use the 13mm ribbon. That will make you a nice big fat rose. So there, I've just done my little spider web there, and I've got my 4mm thread, and I'm in exactly the same way as I did the other one. It's smaller is all. So we've done a French knot to start it off in the middle, and then bringing the ribbon back through to the front of the fabric, swapping for a blunt needle, and then weaving. Obviously there's not quite so much weaving to do because they're smaller, so these get finished a lot quicker. These look really beautiful. They're a great flower for this sort of thing because they're quite robust. If you were making something like a handbag or a spectacles case, these would be really good flowers to put on because they're not going to get caught on anything and ripped off. They're quite robust when they're finished, and they look beautiful. So there, swapping for the pointy needle again to get the ribbon back down onto the underside. So I'm just going to do a few now French knots. They look like little tiny rosebuds, so I'm using the 4mm to do some French knots up here. So once again with the French knot, you're winding the ribbon 3 times around the needle, passing the needle back down through the fabric and pulling tight. I'm going to do some with the 4mm, and I'm going to do some French knots with 2mm as well, just so that we get a variation of little sizes of blossom, I suppose, or buds. So I've got satin and blush. I'm using the satin pen, which is a very subtle pale ivory sort of colour. Just touching the flat end to these little tiny roses and allowing the pigment to sink in, and then using the blush pen on the edges of the petals, and I'm just allowing them to bleed together while the inks are still wet. If you want a more defined effect, allow the first colour to dry off before you put the second colour on, but I think it looks nice with this sort of thing if the colours bleed beautifully together. So I'm just going to continue colouring the rest of these in the same way. I've got a little bronze leaf here now, and I'm just going to sew that onto the centre where I've got that gap, using my invisible thread again. And then this little project is very nearly finished. So all that remains when I've stitched this on is to then stick it onto the surface of the lid of my box. So I'm just going to use a glue around the edge with some padding underneath. And there we are, we're finished. So all of the ribbons that you've seen in this demonstration are available from craftyattic.com. You can get the pens through us as well, with a link through to Caroling and Wilcox, and we have a special discount code for you there. So thank you very much for watching the video. I'll see you soon.